Longtime gamers of Reddit, what will the new gamers of today never experience? Having no idea what you're supposed to do next in a game. There were moments in old games where you just ran around for ages trying to figure out if you missed something or if it was a bug. Now you can just Google/YouTube it. Not to mention, there are many in-game guides to doing things, such as quest markers. Story 2. Remember in fighting games how unlocking characters was usually fun and unorthodox, with different tasks you had to do to unlock them? You don't see that as much today. Story 3. LAN parties, man. I'm not going too far back, but LAN parties were a huge part of the scene back in the early 2000s. Edit. I'm glad LAN parties are still mildly popular amongst gamers. In my city, they're basically dead. Sad face. Story 4. Genuine surprises and mysteries. Obviously, there's occasionally one that comes through, like GTA or weird unfound Dark Souls stuff, but most everything has its code decompiled and secret assets located eventually. I'm thinking particularly of the hunt for the Triforce in Ocarina of Time. There was some Brazilian girl, not even sure that part was true, who was sending what turned out to be fake screenshots of supposedly finding the Triforce. Big long hullabaloo turned out to be fake, but it sucked up so many hours of my young life trying to replicate. Story 5. Playground rumors. I barely experienced this since I was born in 1996, so Google was around and popular for most of my gaming childhood. But there was a time where a friend would tell you something like, I heard that if you use strength on the truck, you can catch a Mew. Or, I heard that there's a way to get a glitch Pokemon that lets you get infinite Master Balls. And you had no easy way to verify that except to try it out yourself. Now if someone says, I heard that there's actually a 4th Pikachu evolution after Raichu, you can just Google it and data miners have already conclusively proven if it's true or false. You know, I personally was in like 4th or 5th grade when Pokemon Red and Blue version came to the United States and really started taking off as like a global phenomenon, and I can absolutely confirm that this story about like playground rumors is 100% true. Like there was no internet where you could go up and look up how to get like Missing No to appear, and like I just remember all of us like with our Game Boys after school kind of testing out this Missing No theory, and then all of us getting different Pokemon to appear on Cinnabar Island. If you're not a Pokemon fan, just bear with me for a second while I nerd out. But basically, what we came to find out is that depending on the name that you put in as your character for the save file, it would determine which random Pokemon you would get surfing up and down Cinnabar Island, in addition to Missing No. And I remember everyone was always jealous of me because for whatever reason, my name computed in the algorithm to give me level 142 Mewtwo's. And so like I was just with my infinite Master Balls loading up on these over level 100 Mewtwo's. And this was like stuff that we did without the internet. We literally just like played the game, swapped rumors, and figured it out totally organically. Man, those were good times. And again, for those non-Pokemon fans out there, Generation 1 Pokemon Mewtwo was literally the most powerful creature in the entire game. So you get an unlimited supply of the strongest character, and he's over the level cap of level 100. Man, that was like literally striking gold as a kid. Story 6. Not sure if this is true, but as someone who mostly plays competitive online games, overcoming imbalances. I used to play StarCraft Brood War a bunch, and it received very little if any balance patches over the years. Balances patches weren't really so much a thing. So instead of the main attitude being X is overpowered, wait till it's nerfed, the main attitude seemed to be, how do we beat this anyway? And it generally seemed to work out. Now, every time someone gets destroyed by something, there's a yell of imbalance, and that's where it ends. No try to beat it, no further thought. Game's imbalanced. That's it. Story 7. Getting a new game, specifically at Toys R Us. Back in the day, you pulled a slip from the game area and paid for that. Then after you paid, you brought the slip to another counter, where they gave you the game. It was such a ritual. Also, spending 2 hours arguing with your brother at Blockbuster about what video game to rent. So I can already tell 7 stories in that this is going to be a huge nostalgia wave for some of us, myself included, and for you younger viewers, you're going to get to maybe take a deep dive and appreciate what early gaming was like when this was sort of at its advent and people were still figuring out just how incredible it could become. So compounding on this story, I remember in addition to like getting the ticket, sometimes you would go to the store, Toys R Us or whatever, and they'd be sold out of the game, and they gave you what was called a rain check, which was basically a ticket that had like a serial number on it, and then it said, come back on this specific day, and we're going to restock, and we're going to hand you, your game. You're basically going to exchange it at that point. And I remember when Pokemon, the yellow version came out, everybody just like rushed to the stores and bought them up so freaking fast. And I was one of those that got a rain check, and all my friends at school already had the game, so I was mad and jealous. They were starting before me. And I remember like literally going into Toys R Us with my rain check, number at 86273. I still remember it over 25 years later, and getting my Pokemon Yellow version. That's literally how you had to do it back in the day. There was no digital downloads and, like stuff like that. So man, that's just such a wave of nostalgia. It feels so good. Story 8. Did you know there was a sequel to that old alien creation game, Spore, called Darkspore? It was basically Spore, but a dungeon crawler. Straight up Diablo. Did you know the maps for Need for Speed, Carbon, and Need for Speed Most Wanted were actually combined once in Need for Speed World? The game had full day/night, making it the only way to experience Carbon at daylight or Most Wanted at night. Did you know that Fear once had a strictly multiplayer game, Fear Online, which was released after Fear 3, but used the Fear 2 engine? People said it was horrendous, but if you're like me, just trying to make another Fear game, on a classic engine no less, after the mess that was Fear 3, is a very large leap in the right direction. Do any of these games sound fun or interesting to you? Something you might consider playing or at least checking out for a couple minutes? Well, F you can't. They're effing dead. I don't mean dead in that nobody plays them anymore. I mean dead as in nobody can play them anymore. Every single one of these games required you to connect to a central, online, publisher-run server, and now that the publisher shut down the server, you can't even load past the main menu. None of you will ever know what it's like to play these games. Too effing bad. It doesn't stop there. Battleforge, Hawken, Ghost in the Shell, FIFA 14, Madden 13, Battlefield 2, multiplayer, and many, many more, but that's just off the top of my head for now. Every single one of these games are dead, permanently. Want to start up a match on a private server with some old buddies and relive some of your glory days? F you can't. Why is this okay? Most of these were full-priced $60 games when they came out. These weren't small nothings, not tiny mobile games that offer little to the world of gaming and are meant to be disposable anyways. I will bet anyone real-world money that a good amount of parents bought FIFA 14, to pick one out of a hat, for their kid, expecting to be able to have some good, clean fun with their kid for years. And now that the server is down, the parent can go F themselves. There's no excuse for this bullcrap games as a service model, if you want to even try to defend it by calling it that. Because when you're holding a literal hard copy of the game on disk, you're holding every single piece of data you need for the game, except for the I am allowed to play it part. Now, sure, publishers have a bottom line. They can't keep a central server running forever. That would be an acceptable excuse for killing games if there was no other option, which there effing is. How many games can you name where you can host a private server for everyone to play on? No central authentication required. Off the top of my head, I can think of DayZ and Minecraft, to name a few big-ticket games. It doesn't matter if it's 500 years from now. If people still own copies of Minecraft and the requisite hardware, they'll be able to pop that crap in and play online. Meanwhile, most of you will never be able to experience Spore Sequel, which is a single-player game no less, because some publisher couldn't give two craps about patching the game, or even releasing the source code so the game's fans could patch it, and decided effing killing it was their best option. Story 9. Game Genie. How has this not been mentioned yet? It's preloaded with cheats and game alterations. You plug your game into it, then plug it into the console. When the game goes to boot, the Game Genie menu comes up first, and you can give yourself any number of cheats. Infinite lives, max hearts, level skips, etc. So Game Genie was actually my first introduction to, cheating in video games. Basically, you would put your cartridge, I had it for the Super Nintendo, SNES, and you would put your cartridge into the Game Genie, then you would put the Game Genie into your cartridge, and then you would basically, input these codes and essentially get access to powers or abilities that make the game incredibly easy to play, which, when you're a kid, I didn't really care to be, stressed out and, getting angry, because video games were very hard back in the day. Let me tell you something. But having, invincibility, unlimited lives, stuff like that, it just made it so much more fun because you could play and not have to worry about, the challenging aspects. Which, again, as a 10-year-old kid, I'm just trying to have fun. And then Game Genie later evolved into Game Shark, and then Action Replay, stuff like that. So now I don't think that those exist anymore because you can just straight up hack and mod games yourselves. But yeah, those were good times. Love the old Game Genie. Story 10. Big box PC games. They were a little bit larger than a ream of printer paper, but there was so much room for artwork showcasing the game outside and inside the box, not to mention a thick manual or two of extra artwork that came inside. I think it was a holdover for when the hardware shipped on 5.25 to 8-inch floppy disks. Over time, more games came out on optical discs, which meant that there was more than enough space to store a digital online manual. As a consequence, boxes shrank, and those physical manuals became booklets, which later became basic instruction cards. And now even those are being phased out over digital downloads. Story 11. So you have this epic game that you're so excited about, and you're getting into it. You've got a real good feel for the crap, but you're 2 hours into the storyline and you have to stop progress, so you can load another disc. It really takes away from the in-the-moment feel that we all take for granted nowadays. For example, imagine playing Geralt in The Witcher. You're jazzed, pumped up, and on the move to tackle a huge storyline. You walk up to the building you're supposed to enter for an encounter, but the screen times out and goes black, then gray, then a DOS screen. You listen to your computer hum, chirp, and crackle, then have to wait 2 or 3 minutes for a load screen. Load screen finally shows up, and then it tells you, insert disk 2. So you eject the disk, maybe your computer has trouble with that, maybe not, and you insert disk 2. The computer loads, and then it thinks, and thinks, and thinks so hard. Then the machine makes a loud jerking noise, then a quiet. To continue, press enter. And frustratingly, you make your way back into your scenario. Maybe 10 minutes you've been removed from the game. You work another hour into the storyline and then you get another pause. Insert disk 3. Copy, paste, repeat. Story 12. I haven't played Sonic 3 in a while. Let's pop that bad boy in. Inserts card in the system for the first time in 8 years. Sega. And no effing updates. Story 13. Non-backlit Game Boy screens. That panic when the sun starts setting just as you were about to start a boss battle with Lieutenant Surge, and also the painstakingly slow progress as you wait to pass street lamps and hold your Game Boy up to the window to see what you're doing. So I definitely remember this, and I remember, you want to talk about like top shelf technology back then. They came out with this thing called the Worm Light that you plugged into like the side console of your Game Boy, and it would just provide like this faint top-down lighting onto the screen. The trouble was, and I don't know if this was a design oversight or not, the light would literally like go directly over the screen, so you had to hold your Game Boy at like this awkward angle to even see. And again, in the late 90s, it seemed really necessary. It was on everybody's wish list. Every kid wanted one. But looking back on it, I'm like, man, this was stupid. But hey, worm lights were the bee's knees back in the day. Story 14. Going to the shop to buy your games. Getting that game you really wanted, and it comes in a big box with fancy graphics, and maybe, if it was a big game, there would be more than one install CD. Wow! Seriously though, I brought RimWorld the other day and thought, dang, I wish I could have this in the proper cardboard game box. It just looks like such a hard copy cover design for a box. Story 15. In 4th grade, I was playing Final Fantasy VII, and I had pilfered the method for breeding a gold chocobo from somewhere and handwritten it down in 4th grade chicken scratch hieroglyphs. Much to my dismay, I never came out with the gold chocobo. So I'm at school one day and Tim, didn't even like Tim, he was pretty snot-nosed, was blabbing about how his older brother can get gold chocobo 100% of the time. Curious, I thought to myself, how could anybody have the knowledge, skill, and patience to do such a thing? I needed to know more. So I picked Tim's brain a little bit, and it was clear he didn't know any more than I did about it. So I asked if I could come spend the night at his house. I spent the night at Tim's house, who I didn't like, so I could have his brother show me how to breed a gold chocobo. Nowadays, I would just YouTube and be done with it. Story 16. The first time a narrow game opened up wide. While I played Ocarina of Time first, the Hyrule Plains didn't deliver half so well the holy crap, I thought the whole game was going to be in there that I got when I first stepped outside of Midgar in Final Fantasy VII. Nowadays, wide open is the expectation. When it was a surprise, it hit like a truck. Story 17. Blasting away at Defender with a crowd of fellow teenagers gathered about you at the arcade as you rake up impossible scores. The boys whisper, the girls swoon, your focus is at 300%. You can't screw up now. The game is throwing everything at you. You dodge this way, that way, putting your entire body into it. The crowd gets bigger and bigger as newcomers realize something historic and epic is happening on that corner. They don't know who you are. They just know you're a sorcerer, a Valkyrie, a digital warrior, the walking dude, the Punisher, the Saint, the Equalizer. Darth Mother effing Vader, for Pete's sake! Where did you come from? Are you even human? For 10 minutes, you're a real hero. Story 18. When you pay $60+ for a game, it comes in a nice case and has a user manual like a school textbook, a poster-sized map of the game world for you to tack up on your wall, etc. Now you pay $60+ for half of a game and you don't even really own it. Story 19. Having to jot down passcodes to continue in games like Metroid or Kid Icarus because no save files. For things like Metroid and maybe the original Legend of Zelda specifically, having to scribble down crude maps of every area on paper so you don't get lost every 44 seconds. Oh boy, yeah, I definitely remember this. There were some games that were on the longer side. Again, a long game back then was considered maybe 3 or more hours of total gameplay from beginning to end. And you would reach these checkpoints you couldn't save, but the game would basically give you like a code of letters or symbols, and you would have to write them down. And then that way, if you had to turn the game off, obviously you couldn't save, you load it back up, and you have to start from the beginning. You put in the code, and then it takes you back to the checkpoint where you last left off. So yeah, that was wild thinking back on it. Story 20. No save runs because you don't have a memory card. Keeping your system running for days, if it holds out, to try to beat a game that usually requires a memory card. The tension of every fight in an RPG mattering because if you wipe, that's it. Also, periodically checking to see if the game is still running by turning your TV on, breathing a sigh of relief, and then going back to your game of Risk. I can't think of a system kids use today besides the now defunct Xbox 360 that doesn't have an onboard hard drive for save files. Back in the day, you had to buy the memory separately. I remember a few months ago when some big AAA title announced you'd only get 3 save slots and you had to pay for more. My first reaction was, you mean like my N64 games? I could make that work. Story 21. Online multiplayer FPS games with staying power. I remember playing Quake, Halo, and Unreal Tournament for years and years after they came out. Now it's like every year they want you to crank out more and more money for a barely stable clone of the previous year's game with one minor addition, like now you can float in midair for a bit before landing, or we made a Minecraft/COD matchup that looks like a 12-year-old did the graphics for. Oh, and if you try to play like a month after it's released, it's pointless because everyone playing has completely mastered the game and it's like coming into a new school in the middle of the semester, only no one takes you aside to catch you up. You're just at the mercy of all these lunatics. Story 22. That feeling when you switch a game over for the first time from software to hardware rendering. I remember when I bought my first 3D graphics accelerator. I saved my money for months or longer. All allowance, birthday cash, everything. I went to the local computer store and I told them I wanted a 3D accelerator. I knew it needed to be PCI because my machine, a compact with a P2 233 MHz and 48 megabytes of RAM, didn't have an AGP. He recommended the Elsa Eraser 2. It had 16 megabytes of onboard memory, and based on the rival TNT chipset, he took my $186, a lot of money at the time. I waited on backorder for months, and it finally arrived. A friend of mine came over to help, and we installed the drivers and fired up our, at the time favorite, Quake 2. God, it looked like crap. The same crap it always looked like. Then we found it in the settings and switched from software to HW rendering. Our jaws dropped. It was the most beautiful thing, so smooth, so realistic. I know, right? Kids these days will never get that spike in their veins, that dragon to chase. I still own that card. Story 23. The magical adventures provided by Sierra Online and LucasArts. At the age of around 10, my understanding of English, which is not my native language, went through the roof playing these games. The stories were so rich and funny, although sometimes next to impossible to figure out by yourself. I'm looking at you, Leisure Suit Larry 1 and Police Quest 1. Story 24. Playing your Game Boy in the backseat of a car ride, using the streetlights to play and hearing the rain and local radio playing pop songs. Good times, if you don't count the motion sickness. Story 25. They're never going to experience having to do a run from the start because the game didn't have a save point. They're never going to have to worry about lugging a computer, monitor, and stool to a friend's house for a party. They're never going to experience that feeling when you discover that cheat code you were given actually works. They're never going to know what it truly feels like to stay up for hours trying to find that one pathway or boss weakness to exploit in order to progress, and you want to be the first one in your group of friends to say that you did it all on your own. No help from Game Informer or anything. Story 26. Fighting games in the arcade. Yes, I know they still have them, but you're basically playing by yourself or against the friend you came with. I'm talking about a line of kids showing up after school with the winner getting a free game and the loser having to walk his happy ass back to the end of the line to wait to play again. No complaints about lag, no keyboard warriors. Look your opponent in the eye, get another quarter, and march to the back of the line. Story 27. Voice-acted GameStop skits that advertise pre-order bonuses, back when pre-order bonuses were still kind of rare. Those playlists on YouTube that showed the best Halo plays and fails of the week. The golden age of machinima. Being able to tell if your game is actually loading by the sound the disc makes when it spins. Story 28. Having a secret LAN cable for when parents think they've confiscated your internet because you were being a little crap, and the sheer panic when you heard their car pull up in the driveway early. Story 29. 1. Connecting a special cassette player, dataset, to your Commodore 64 to run games. 2. Playing text-based games like Zork and having to just imagine everything is happening and manually drawing out maps. 3. You will never have the experience of playing a flat game like Commander Keen, then playing a very basic game, which still blew your mind, like the original Doom on 3.5-inch floppies, and then playing a game like Unreal and being able to look up and watching creatures flying around. It was that sense of, I'm experiencing something unique. This is special. Story 30. A community where everyone had a mic. Back in the mid-2000s, when the 360 was newish, everybody had a mic and used it. In lobbies, you could hear your team and the other team, and trash talk was everywhere. It was so much fun. Now, everybody is too shy to talk. When the party system came out for Xbox, it was great when you had friends to stack, but made solo queue a lot less fun. Now you find a team through IRL friends or online communities like Reddit. It feels less organic this way. Story 31. Game secrets. Back in the day when someone told you that you could get Mew by playing the slot machines at the game corner exactly 526 times, surfing up and down Cinnabar Isle until a random encounter appeared, then talking to a Team Rocket grunt so he'd give you the keys to his truck that you could drive and Mew would be revealed hiding underneath, you had to try it yourself to find out that it was absolute nonsense. Story 32. Seeing firsthand the slow advancement of games. Going from MS, DOS on the computer, to NES, then Super Nintendo, hours of Sonic on the Sega, and for the first time seeing a game, Mortal Kombat, in 3D with the Sega 32X. From there, the glory that is the N64, watching Dreamcast crash and burn, seeing Game Boys pop up and two companies entering the game with PlayStation and Xbox. It was amazing and still is. I, like many of you, am so excited to see what's coming around the corner. What new heights will VR and AR bring? We simply don't know, and that's the best part. Story 33. For me, reading the manual in the car ride home after your mom/dad agreed to buy you that game, or allowed you to buy it. I would read those manuals over and over until I got home. Also, I somehow managed to beat Final Fantasy VII, Warcraft 3, and Diablo 2, plus Destruction of Baal, without knowing a single word of English. Speaking about Final Fantasy VII, please insert disc 2 to continue the game. Oh, or how about putting in a disc and not having to download 52 new updates to play? Story 34. Going to Blockbuster or Hollywood Video on Friday night and hoping you'd get the brand new release for the week. Actually reading gaming magazines like GamePro, Electronic Gaming Monthly, and Nintendo Power and seeing which games you were going to ask for Christmas, knowing damn well you'll be lucky to get one at least. Story 35. Exploration and discovery like vanilla World of Warcraft. The world was large and seamless. Quests necessitated reading the text. Later on, websites created maps, and databases aggregated location data and item data. Then you played to whatever the spreadsheet said the current meta is. The internet is great, but it really takes away that sense of wonder and discovery. Totally agree with this. I think that the internet and YouTube and, helpful guides, things of that nature, it's led to a lot of monotony in online gaming, whereas before you kind of had to figure things out for yourself. Now you can just pull up a YouTube video. Okay, what's the best build to be successful in this game? What are the best strategies to be most effective? And because of that, you see a lot of redundancy, whether that's Pokemon online battling, like everyone just kind of uses more or less the same Pokemon, or like if you're playing Call of Duty or Halo, most everyone uses very similar loadouts and strategies, whereas before you saw a lot more outside the box thinking because you had to rely on your own intuition. So yeah, that is a bit of a shame. Story 36. The rise and fall of MMOs as they once were. EverQuest, World of Warcraft, even less popular games like City of Heroes came out in a unique time in gaming history that can't be repeated. Games today are more focused on the individual player and tend to be faster, both in gameplay and reward. Changes to the genre mean that you'll never experience these kinds of games with the same sense of community and wonder. Story 37. Making mods and maps in COD 2 and COD 4. I used to have so much fun doing that. I actually started mapping way more than I even played. Then they got greedy and stopped allowing it, so they could release their map packs on DLC. Gone are the days of designing maps for snipers only, or jump maps. Story 38. The rapid expansion and evolution of the gaming industry, all while remaining affordable. I can't imagine that the next 25 years of gaming will have as many great hurdles as the previous 25 years, especially with all of these microtransactions, reskins, and quick dollar games that come out. Story 39. Not having the internet and relying on hearsay about the popular games that year. So many amazing urban legends that turned out to be false, like Mew under the truck, and even more amazing, the ones that were true. Follow this convoluted list of steps and Missing No will appear and give you hundreds of items. Story 40. The beginning of it all. New gamers can jump in now and play every version of every game that has come out. A large percentage of the time, they can just download it on their laptop. There's nothing like the old days of waiting in anticipation for a game to come out, or wonder if a series was even going to get a sequel. I mean, who knew Mega Man, Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and Castlevania would all go on to be major gaming franchises? Those games came out the same year. Yeah, I want to touch quickly on the point about not knowing when sequels would come out, because there really wasn't any way to promote that because the internet didn't really exist. So I remember playing games and enjoying them, and then about a year or so later, sometime later, there would a commercial would come on the TV and it would be advertising a sequel, and it'd be like, oh my god. And then you would go to school the next day and tell all your friends, hey, did you see the commercial? Donkey Kong Country 2 is coming out, and Donkey's not going to be there, you got to use Diddy. The anticipation of that was just always so cool. And I think the spontaneity of that news hitting you and hitting the community, it just made it that much more hyped when the game came out. Now that still kind of exists in a sense to this day, but now more so than ever, things get leaked all the time. So even before a major announcement for a sequel or a new series is made, someone in the dev process has leaked that news, and so it's not nearly as earth-shattering as it was at the time. Story 41. I really stopped gaming in the 2000s, so everything feels super fast and realistic to me whenever I casually play at a friend's house. I think one of my favorite things was discovering something new about a game that you kind of had to have insider knowledge about. An example was on Star Fox 64. I remember finally figuring out how to take different routes to beat the game. It was so awesome playing new levels on an old game. Story 42. I would say the experience of hanging out with your friends in a bedroom and just enjoying watching your friend play. Back then, we were all Let's Players and commentators. We didn't just do it for the views. My fondest memories of childhood gaming are sharing one-player games and occasionally screen sharing for that rare multiplayer game that you didn't fight over. Story 43. The ride home from GameStop, clutching the box in your hands, super excited to throw the disc in when you get home. That anticipation is rarely matched. Story 44. But the one that I feel worst about and miss the most myself is buying a whole entire game with one transaction. Nowadays, you have to buy the game, the DLC, the season pass, etc., etc. I totally miss this too. Just buying the game, the disc, the cartridge, whatever it was, and that was enough. That was it. You didn't have to purchase anything else. Nowadays, you pay money up front for the base game, and then it's okay, if you want to enjoy the latest, greatest aspects of this game, you're going to have to download the DLC for an additional fee. It would be like playing the original Mario Brothers on Super NES, and you get to play the first world, so the first 5 levels or whatever, and then a couple of months later, Nintendo comes out and says, okay, if you want to advance to level 2, you're going to have to pay $5, and then we'll unlock that in your game. And then if you want to get all the way to Bowser, we're going to give you 5 more waves of DLC at $5 a pop. I understand that it's a money-making model, but I absolutely do miss the days of just buying the game and then it's yours forever, and you don't have to purchase anything else to enhance the experience. Story 45. The good stuff. Opening a box game, especially PC games with feelies. That sense of achievement of saving $80 at age 7 to buy a copy of Super Mario Bros. 3. The bigger sense of achievement of knowing every pixel of Super Mario Bros. 3 as you appreciate that $80 well spent on a good game. The smell of the brand new IBMs in the computer lab before a fresh round of Oregon Trail Deluxe. Getting together with 2 to 10 other friends at one friend's house to play games and take turns playing, reading the hint guide, and making a running MST3K level commentary. Changing gaming devices when your friend's parents say, "It's nice outside, go play outside." So you go over to John's and play SimCity 2000 on his dad's new 486, or play some obscure title on Benny's Atari XE. Little to no warring between fan bases. Everyone liked all of the franchises and shared bits on it based on what the newest, most hyped game was. Being thoroughly impressed that $50 PC game you just bought came on 10 floppies, and even more impressed with what they jammed onto those floppies. Being excited to see entire level layouts in gaming magazines. Heck, just the gaming magazines themselves. The bad stuff. Buying a game for your console for $49.99 and finding out the controls suck, the level design was masochistic, and the music is ear essay. Having to uninstall a game from your PC to install another one because you don't have enough room for it without on your 80 MB HDD. 3 words. DOS memory management. Blowing on your cartridges till the contacts tarnish so much your game no longer works. Throwing out a $200 game console over a $25 AC adapter because people were not smart enough to realize they could just buy one at Radio Shack, like via the internet. Having a disc go bad for one of your multi-disc DOS titles, and then having to wait for the company to send you a replacement, if they even will. Losing your copy protection manual / code wheel, when a friend borrows your cartridge and moves away and never gives it back. Some people might remember what installing a sound card was like pre-internet. Do the words IRQ, memory address, DMA, and port, not work-related, mean anything to you? The general expense of everything back then. Computers cost $1,000 to $10,000, depending on configuration. The average home PC had basic VGA, internal speaker sound, a sub 100 megabyte, not gigabyte or terabyte, hard disk, no mouse, a loud keyboard, so gaming at night was a no-no, either from the bleeper or the keyboard, and sounded like a jet ski taking off starting up, which might be a good nostalgic thing for some. Game consoles were still $200 plus back then, and $200 in 1988 was like $800 now. If your computer's motherboard blew up, you were in deep crap. If your NES started blinking the screen, you made it worse blowing on the carts, as I mentioned before, because no internet to tell you how to pull contacts. You take the good with the bad. Story 46. Feelies. When you bought a big box game in the Commodore 64/ZX Spectrum era, it wasn't unusual to get a whole heap of crap in the box with the game. For example, I bought a copy of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and in the box you got a Don't Panic badge, some peril-sensitive sunglasses, a packet of pocket fluff, and a small bag that was empty but claimed to contain a microscopic space fleet. It was nice. Sometimes it was jokey stuff like in Hitchhiker's Guide, but I remember also getting novellas, cloth maps, coins, in-universe magazines, and newspapers. It was awesome. Oh, but one thing gamers today will never experience is being stuck in a game and having absolutely no idea how to progress. No quick guides or solutions to look up online. Story 47. Community servers and custom maps in online games. In the heyday of games like CS, Unreal Tournament, etc., servers where everyone knew each other, it was like an actual community, and servers having a healthy selection of constantly new and interesting custom maps. Your favorite game never got boring because there were always new maps to play on. Story 48. The difficulty. Nowadays, every game has an easy mode that anyone can just breeze through. Back in the day, every game had one difficulty: hard. They kicked your ass over and over, but were always fair. When you died, you knew it was your fault and you learned from your mistakes. The kids these days hold up Dark Souls as being super difficult, but honestly, it's just a resurrection of that design philosophy. I personally prefer it because the sense of accomplishment is very fulfilling when you finally get good. I understand that this is not for everyone and advocate for a wide spectrum of difficulties, but I would like more modern games to have a difficulty that requires mechanical mastery, like 80s and 90s games. So I kind of touched on this already. Games back then were absolutely very, very difficult. I do, however, agree with nowadays there being like easier modes added, only so that casual players or children, people that aren't that good, have the opportunity to complete the games. I remember there were plenty of games I had on the NES, like Ninja Gaiden, Battletoads in particular, games like that that are notoriously ridiculously difficult. I just flat out never beat them as a kid, because I didn't have the skill set as an 8 or 9-year-old to master those kinds of games. And so nowadays, like the modern equivalent of a Ninja Gaiden or a Battletoads, if it's impossibly difficult on the normal difficulty and I'm an 8-year-old kid, I have the option to switch over to beginner mode and get to play out the rest of the game. I shouldn't be deprived of the entire scope of the game just because it's very difficult, if that makes sense. So I get where this poster is coming from, but I also kind of disagree in the sense that having these easier difficulties is fine. And if you want a challenge, that's when you have the option of playing on a harder difficulty. So I'm cool with that. Story 49. They will not experience the art of games. Everything is by formula. There are engines everywhere you look. Nothing is original or has the potential to be original as the first good classic games. They will grow in a world where games are normal, integrated into society, and be judged by the amount of time spent on games. They will fail to stop and smell the roses in games, as we see competitive gaming is on top of every chart. Even if they want to, there will be very few games left worth the stop. Story 50. Open your manual to page 32 and choose the picture you see on that page. I had to do this so much for Prince of Persia 2. At least Planet's Edge worked its document check into the fiction of the game. Story 51. Games that generally expected you to figure crap out without giving you a GPS and 30 objective markers to make sure you don't get lost. Sometimes this was really great. Other times, it made the game nearly unplayable without a guide or inside knowledge. Good luck figuring out how to beat Castlevania 2 without someone telling you how to summon that effing tornado. The best games of today generally let you disable those no dum-dums left behind features and provide enough information, signs, etc. to let you navigate around without the helpers. Story 52. Spending dozens, if not hundreds of hours in a game, finishing it, then coming back to it a year later to replay it, and finding new things to do that you never knew existed. And these weren't small things. These would be massive story-related things. I remember finishing Final Fantasy VII, spent about 80 hours in the game. The first time, I never knew about chocobo breeding, Vincent, Yuffie, fighting any of the weapons outside of the base story, where half the summon materia were, most of the characters' loyalty missions, etc. I missed so much content in that game. But the thing that makes this such an old-school experience is that the internet wasn't what it is today. There wasn't really a way to know if you'd completed everything and found every secret. Sometimes you'd get into arguments about secret locations of a game simply because you found it and your friends had never seen it, so they wouldn't believe you. And short of them coming over, there wasn't a way to prove that you were right. Story 53. Heavy pockets full of jangling quarters, feeling like you have a super good time ahead of you. Setting up a quarter on a machine to reserve the next match. Being a little scared and intimidated by all the effed up druggies and weirdos who hung out at the arcade all day. I remember in the late 80s, there was a guy who used to hang in the arcade who wore no shoes and always had a tank top on. He also had a shaved head and his pet snake wrapped around his neck, just dangling there. Big long effing snake. As a little kid, this was a pretty wild sight, especially for that time period. Arcades were a little like the dirty spaceports in sci-fi movies. Story 54. Game Shark. You would plug the Game Shark into your system, then plug your cartridge, yes, cartridge, no discs here, into the Game Shark, and it was basically like entering console commands. You could hack or cheat almost anything in certain games. Story 55. Final stage of 2D computer games, many of which age well even today. Early stage of 3D games, not so much. Example, SC1, Dune 2000, AoE 2, Diablo 2, Red Alert 2, Ragnarok Online, and so on. Golden age of tool select / world editor. The most powerful ones I know of are Warcraft 3 and Neverwinter Nights. PlanetSide 1, Shadowbane, and SWG. Story 56. Renting video games. I know you can still do that, but what I mean is, it's the weekend, you're bored, and you beg mom or dad for some cash to go to the video store and rent a game, and that game was your whole weekend. Also going to the library to get player's guides to beat said games, as games back then were made hard, so you would buy player's guides to beat them. Also, when you wanted to try out the latest games, going to demo kiosks before demos were a thing. Story 57. E.T. in that damn pit. Having to pay $15 to get a walkthrough, going to play an old game you love and not being able to because you have to enter the Xth word on page Y in order to get past the first 5 minutes, and God knows where that manual is now. Story 58. A complete game made by competent studios who aren't pushing propaganda, Looking at you, BioWare, and that Andromeda bullcrap that isn't intentionally ruined by paywalls, loot boxes, and day one DLC across the industry, with very few exceptions. On each generation of new consoles, out of the hundreds of awful releases, there's only a handful of games that are any good, and only 2 or 3 are actually great games that deserve to be bought. Gaming is crap these days. Story 59. Calling Dark Souls hard. Female dog, you want difficult? Might and Magic 1. No map? Grab yourself some grid paper and start mapping. Didn't write down that clue you saw back somewhere 20 hours ago? Good luck. Story 60. Game manuals. Blowing into / licking an NES cartridge, giant PC game boxes in weird shapes and sizes, sitting up close to the TV because controllers weren't always wireless, renting games from Hastings or Blockbuster, playing a game without any prior knowledge as to what you were getting into because we didn't have the internet and dozens of reviews accessible at our fingertips, cheat codes, and also rumors. Everyone would play a game, and the following school year was just a rumor mill as to features and secrets from the most popular games. I don't know how the kid did it, but he swore up and down he caught a Togepi in Viridian Forest in Pokemon Yellow, and later caught the legendary glitch Pokemon Pikablue. Without the internet readily available at most kids' houses, no one could fact-check, and countless hours were spent trying to replicate all the rumors that had spread about hidden game features and Easter eggs. Story 61. Getting a game that was generally complete. Back in the Xbox / PS2 / GameCube days, the typical ways for devs or publishers to fix bugs was to re-release their games, probably through those greatest hits we used to get back then. But nowadays, we got publishers getting horny after the dollars, which probably contributes to the rushed releases. An update patch in several GBs isn't so unusual. Story 62. Going over to a friend's house after school to play video games. Everything is online now, which is absolutely fine, but split screen will always have a special place in my heart. Maybe it's because of childhood bonds, maybe it's because of nostalgia, maybe it's because I would be physically unable to avoid staring at their screen and using that information to snipe them from across the map. Story 63. Going through the incredibly annoying ordeal of which version is everyone running. When games were just getting to the point of realizing they could release online patches, those patches didn't automatically download, but they were also so ubiquitous that everyone patched the big titles they were playing. Then, once you get to a LAN party, there's 2 dudes with pirated copies, one who bought it from Steam, the crappy version, and a few who just bought the box. Everyone had their own version. The pirate boys had used the same key, and then you'd have to share the patches and hope they didn't enable whatever the cracks on those pirated versions disabled. That part of being a poor kid and sharing games on burn CDs, I don't miss one bit. Story 64. Experiencing a game in a time where we were less distracted, having no smartphone, no YouTube, Reddit, or Facebook. When you sat down to do something, you really just did that. You didn't have instant access to a bunch of downloadable games. You had a few games on a shelf, in boxes. You had to read about them in a magazine, talk about them with friends, then go to some place to take them home. Those are crucial factors when it comes to how much you enjoy anything. Story 65. Getting an unlabeled 5.4-inch floppy disk from your friend, putting it into your 1541 disk drive for your Commodore 64, typing load, $8, list, and getting a long list of games you've never seen before. Loading up one after the other to find out that half of them don't work and the other half is crap. But some of these games were awesome and you'd play them for weeks. Upgrading to an Amiga 500 and getting piles of unlabeled 3.5-inch discs from your friends and putting in one after the other to see what's on them. Again, pretty much half of them wouldn't boot or have some effing read/write error at some point during the game, but there were always hidden gems. Story 66. Going to the rental place, renting a game that you've been working on, and seeing a save file from someone else that already has all the cool crap unlocked. The only way I got to see Supersonic when I was little. Story 67. The pure multiplayer bliss that was Halo 3. Played that game a lot. Can't say I ever played a default map or game mode. All of the best multiplayer modes and maps were made by other people. Had a group of people and maybe we would play Duck Hunt or Infected, or go on Forge and build our own houses and whatnot. Every day on that game was so much fun. I've yet to find another multiplayer game that I'm not bored with or angry at after a certain extent. Halo 3 was perfect. Story 68. Going in dry on Dwarf Fortress because there just wasn't as many resources as there are today. YouTube is awesome. Same goes for other roguelike RPGs that I hope will live on but aren't visually spectacular, so are going to mainly get ignored bored, even though they often have better stories and more replayability than a lot of the games that have come out in recent history. Story 69. How much fun renting video games in movies was. There was no internet, nobody you knew had the internet, so there was no waiting on the edge of your seat for review scores. You just went to the Blockbuster, which meant leaving your home, my gosh, and picked whatever game had the coolest box art. Then, if you wanted to play multiplayer, you actually had to make in real life friends, maybe even your neighbors. Sure, you had less games to play, but that was the beauty of it. Life was simpler, and you were happier because of it. Story 70. Not always having some kind of level progression with XP points and usually some form of premium currency that unlocks levels faster. Mario didn't have to level up to get different abilities. You just had to get them in the level you were on. And grinding. Every damn game needs to be grinded for this or that thing that, when unlocked, makes you so much more powerful. Single-player games that you play to beat, and if you replayed a level, it would be just for fun. No XP grind, just replaying purely for enjoyment. Unheard of in most modern games. Story 71. Not knowing what you're getting into when you play a game. I remember the first time I played Conker's Bad Fur Day. All I knew was that it's funny as hell. Besides that, I knew nothing else about the game. I didn't read any guides or walkthroughs and would be stuck on one level for days before figuring it out. Easily one of my fondest memories playing a game. Story 72. I used to have my dad take me to Barnes & Noble. I'd get a real book, but I had a friend whose mom worked there, so I had her set it aside for me. So as soon as I go through the door, I'd grab it from her and walk to the cheat code section and write crap down. I had a time limit because my dad would go get a coffee, so how long it took him to do that was how long I had to choose a book. Story 73. That joy of waiting and waiting for a brand new console. Having watched the commercials on TV for all the new games that will come out for said console. Getting hyped up for it. Reading up on all the new features. Choosing the color of your console and controllers. The N64 and Game Boy Color really subverted my expectations when I was a kid. Even now, I've barely seen a commercial for a video game on TV in years. I think the last commercial I remember seeing was for The Last of Us or Uncharted. I remember how much hype I got for Mass Effect when the commercials would come on when I got home from school. Story 74. Not being able to save your game at any point you felt like. I remember having to pause a game and leave my Nintendo powered up, and then getting back to it after school the next day. Story 75. Quantum leaps in technology gains. Going from an Atari to an NES, or an NES to an SNES, you'd see graphics and games you didn't think were possible. Or listening to the beeps on your PC, and inserting a sound blaster and now hearing actual music. The newest consoles or PC hardware just introduced slight evolutions, better resolution or more characters on screen, etc. You expect this type of stuff. Yesteryear, new machines would introduce you to the impossible. Story 76. Back when Mortal Kombat first came out for Sega and SNES, I actually wrote Nintendo a letter asking for the fatality list, and I also kind of female dogged about there not being any gore because the SNES was clearly a better system and my a-hole friends on Sega were rubbing the blood coat in my face. So, you're welcome guys. MK2 had blood in it because of me. Oh, and they did send me the fatality list too. Story 77. Don't copy that floppy, which, much like just say no to drugs, we promptly ignored. Most people I knew had 2 floppy drives for the explicit purpose of pirating software via SneakerNet. If you were lucky, you made friends with the guy who would wait until long-distance prices dropped at night and dial into a secret Where's BBS to download floppy images over a 2400 bits modem, because the internet was still just a close research network between universities and the military. Story 78. The moment with old school games before the days of saving, where you would fight so hard to get to a level and only have 1 or 2 lives to beat the game. But you didn't know when the end of the game would be, so you had to pause the screen and analyze any major enemies that could kill you before pausing to carry out your plan. When I was a kid, this often including inviting over your friends so that during each pause, you could have your summit meeting as to what to do. Story 79. Reading the 1,000-page game manual full of controls and lore on the way home from the store. Cheat CC and other sites. Putting the game in and playing it right then. Accusing each other of screen watching. No force connecting to keyboards. no internet connection to worry about, backwards compatibility, brand new games being about $30. Blew my mind when I saw a $60 game. Having your mind absolutely blown when going from 2D Mario or Zelda to 3D. Being able to bring your favorite game to your friend's house to play. Nowadays, it takes so long to install that you're better off bringing your whole system. Sorry for the list, I just really miss old gaming, lol. Story 80. I remember reading guides on GameFAQs with plain text and ACS2 art. That site was my go-to for gaming way back, and I was so proud of getting like 700 plus points on the forums. 1 point per day logged in, if I recall correctly. Story 81. Insane loading times of C64 with a cassette drive, and also pirating games for said machine with a double-deck boombox. You just had to turn the volume down so you didn't have to listen to the weird noise, which was like using dial-up. Another thing you don't hear anymore. My parents didn't hear it back then either because I used a pillow as a silencer. Me too. I am definitely guilty of using a pillow or a blanket to cover up the dial-up tone when I was connecting to the internet and wasn't supposed to be online. Good times. Comment below if you remember exactly what that dial-up tone sounds like. I would do it right now, but I don't want to destroy my microphone. Story 82. Playing the same 5 to 6 sub or games over and over again. Games were incredibly expensive at the time of the NES. My parents only bought me games for birthdays and Christmas, and on top of that, games were bought on premise and box art alone because reviews certainly didn't exist. So outside of the occasional rental, you played the same fistful of games until you could eventually maybe beat level 3 of one of them. Story 83. Impractical light attachments on the Game Boy Color for the secret Pokemon Blue playing when it was past your bedtime. Opening up the brand new Nintendo/Game Boy boxes and reading the manuals. Blowing on an N64 cartridge to make it work. Story 84. The Schoolyard Lies. Yeah, there's a secret warp pipe in Mario 2. If you find it, you might have to fight Mike Tyson. This was the same system we used to get correct info, so it wasn't always easy to parse. Hell, some guy tried to tell me that Metroid was a girl. So I'm not sure if this is a joke or not. I kind of hope it is, because everybody knows that Metroid, aka Samus, gotta be referring to Samus here, right, is 100% a female. Story 85. Those big game guides. Not that they don't make them anymore, but they're definitely less common, and you can find everything you need on the internet anyway. I think I still have one for Resident Evil 2 somewhere. Might have to go dig that up. Story 86. Memory cards. Polygon graphics like the old Crash Bandicoot games. Games being complete and without any DLC, free or paid. Cabled controllers on consoles. The AV cables and those funky blocks you had to use on some TVs. Free local, PS1 and 2, and online, PS3 multiplayer. Demo discs and PlayStation magazines that were bundled with them, and the list goes on. So demo discs, man, I'd forgotten about those. I remember where I grew up, you could go to Pizza Hut on the weekends. So Saturday or Sunday, you go to the local Pizza Hut, you get kids' pizza, and with it, they would include oftentimes like a demo disc for like a PS1 game or something like that. And that was my first introduction to Crash Bandicoot. Actually came on a demo disc in the late 90s. So that was kind of how companies and devs would promote their games. Obviously, they would do commercials still a little bit too, but like having that physical copy and being able to play like one level of a game, and then obviously you love it and then you want to play the whole thing, so then you ask your parents to get you that whole, disc or game for the next holiday, the next opportunity you get to have it. Those were good times, and good pizza too. I miss old school Pizza Hut. Story 87. How frustrating it was to figure out a dungeon or where to go next if you didn't have the strategy guide. This does not apply to all games though. Thank the stars for the internet. I've got 2 words for you, and if you're with me, give it a thumbs up. Those 2 words are water temple. Moving on. Story 88. Watching the tape counter. Cobblers selling $1.99 games. Picking your sound card and calibrating your joystick every time. Quake 3 at a LAN party. Edit. Not having access to cheats and hints on the internet. We had to wait until a magazine published something. Having to fine-tune your auto-exec-bat and config sys to get enough free memory to launch a game. Story 89. Manually saving your game. No checkpoint, aside from several platforming like Crash. If you die, you start from the last save point. One of the reasons I love/hate Alien Isolation. I know a lot of hard/ultra difficult modes of today's VGs have this feature, but not everyone's gonna do that. Story 90. Boot disks. I remember having to boot off a 3.5-inch floppy with custom config.sys and other files to play MechWarrior 2 on my Packard Bell 486 because the default files weren't optimized properly. Also, getting IRQs and DMA channels when installing games and having to choose the correct model of sound card. SB16, y'all. Story 91. Being stuck on a game and taking forever to figure it out. Hours, days, weeks, months. Being so desperate to get further/more in a game that you try whatever crazy rumor you hear. When a game costs $50 and that was the whole thing. Physical CDs for computers. Having to look up codes in the manual. Cheat codes. Turning a game inside out looking for every single secret because there was no internet. Buying physical strategy guides. Story 92. Playing complete titles. Games used to be a one-off. They put all their eggs into one basket for better or worse. There was no day one patch to save them from a bug. You put the media in and bam, you were off to the races. That being said, games were smaller. I think gamers had a different appreciation for a game. Now gamers have plenty of options. LAN parties aren't much of a thing anymore. Co-op is almost entirely dead. Only a few titles that actually push couch co-op, Overcooked, Cuphead, etc. But gamers don't need to experience having to go home around 7 p.m. and not being able to game with friends. Now people can game together right up until bed. It means that they have more time in a day to be able to do the things they enjoy. They might play outside longer knowing they can game online in the evening. Gamers can also connect with way more people, join groups of like-minded individuals that enjoy the same things that they enjoy. It's not as difficult finding groups to play with. There's also far more female gamers I've noticed over the past 10 years. People looking to find that special someone who games can actually find someone now. Part of the question makes me wonder, if I went through it again, what really would be different? It's more online now. There's still quite a bit of hype around release. I guess there was less coverage on TV and magazines, but that's all replaced with YouTube and websites now. You know, something while reading this that just kind of jogged me a little bit. The comment about there being like more female gamers now. And I distinctly remember like when I was younger in primary school, girls like didn't have Game Boys. They didn't, at least outwardly so, they didn't appear to game. But it makes me wonder like how many girls secretly had Game Boys at home or had like, you know, consoles at home. They just didn't talk about it at school because that's not really like what girls, at least in America and the United States, did. So if you happen to be a female listening to this and you had like a secret gaming console that you played and you heard the boys at school talking about it, but you never engaged in that conversation, if you were one of those, I'm just curious. Go ahead and drop a comment because I have a feeling that there have always been female gamers, but now I think it's just more socially apropos for them to be out of the woodworks. Not that that was ever anything to be ashamed of. Video games are awesome, right? But I'm curious. I'm curious about that. How many female gamers were there back in like the 80s and 90s? Story 93. Not being able to look up everything online. Games back then were filled with searches, puzzles, and riddles, and you just had to work through them. Sometimes you got stuck for weeks, and you'd have to consult with your friends, let someone else have a crack at it, or if you got truly desperate, find a player's guide, which were actual printed books you could buy, and see if that had a solution, or call their customer service hotline and ask for a hint. This could be incredibly frustrating, but it was also very rewarding and led to very intimate familiarity with games if you had looked at everything a dozen times over. Today, you can look up the solution to any such problem in seconds, so most games don't even have them anymore. You just get a quest marker and puzzles you can solve in seconds. Story 94. One of the things I missed from the N64/PS era was the importance of every little detail. Nowadays, you walk into a room and it's full of furniture and lighting effects and everything, but back then, a room having a chair was a big deal. It was a textured, physical object. The game devs only had so much space in the cartridge to work with, and they chose this chair. It could mean anything. Maybe if I can jump onto it, somehow I'll get to a secret area. It almost never did, but occasionally you'd be rewarded for noticing stuff like that. Story 95. Earning the secrets in games. Back when Super Smash Bros. Hit the N64, the feeling of stumbling across Ness or Captain Falcon after hours of playing was amazing. Now you have data miners who dig for every secret in the game and spoil it. You have people who don't want to be surprised, only quickly and easily validated. We're playing the game and trying every little nook and cranny until you stumbled onto the solution or found an Easter egg. Those days are gone. Story 96. Accidentally putting in the wrong password/passcode and somehow starting at a completely different point, much farther ahead in the game. Happened to me and some friends playing Echo the Dolphin. We had different game systems, and one day we put the code for one in the other game. We ended up in some advanced level we had never seen before. Story 97. Hot Seat Multiplayer. Typing in the basic code for a game from the back of a computer magazine, saving it to a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk, and taking it to school to trade it for others your friends had typed in. Planning ahead when you had to load a game from a cassette. It took up to an hour to load before you could play, and due to unshielded cabling, the TV, monitor, had to be turned off while the loading process was underway. Story 98. The thrill of becoming a game reviewer based on writing talent as opposed to attractiveness. Nowadays, PR companies don't want to deal with review websites unless they either have thousands and thousands of people there already or video content. I effing loved receiving 2 to 3 games per week free of charge based on my 200-strong readership. Story 99. For me, it was going to Toys R Us and pulling that stock tag off the giant wall of Nintendo games. Then going to that little counter to get my game after paying for it. I would be so happy reading the manual on the car ride back. Yeah, you can go to GameStop or whatever now, but there was something about that wall. No game boxes, just a wall of tags you take to the register and cards with the game cover and maybe some screen caps. Although Toys R Us just closed, it seems like a lifetime ago, and when it went, so did childhood. Story 100. In terms of old school MMOs, the mutual respect between players. Trolling wasn't a huge thing back in the early EverQuest/Asheron's Call/DAOC days. Nowadays, you can't play a MMO without having a ridiculously toxic community everywhere you go. I remember the times in AC when you could have a queue system and not have to worry about everyone jumping the line and stealing loot on a couple-hour respawn. Granted, people still did it from time to time, but they didn't make a career of it. Oh, how I miss those old-school MMO days. Sad face. And finally, Story 101. LAN parties. Back in the late 90s, I shared a place with my older brother. We had a 4-computer setup that consisted of my newest computer, my old computer, my older brother's newest computer, and his older computer. My older brother worked a lot and didn't really game much, but my younger brother did and was over at our place often. Couple that with my older brother's son coming over for weekend visits. Brother was divorced, and you have many, many weekends playing Quake, Quake 2, Diablo, CNC Red Alert, Baldur's Gate, Duke Nukem, Half-Life, and whatever else my younger brother, nephew, and an occasional 4th nephew who would get permission to come visit and stay the night. Soda, chips, pizza, camaraderie. It was the best. We all still refer to that time as our golden age of gaming. These days, LAN parties are kind of the opposite. What with internet speeds being what they are now and games more often lacking a LAN option because of it.